próximas incorporaciones de gente que podamos llamar a nuestro sector.
Vale, me hablas de los problemas que abordáis, pero ¿qué soluciones inmediatas se podría tomar para ir solucionándolos?
Pues mira, nosotros manejamos 5 ítems fundamentales. Uno, por supuesto, que el precio hora que los pagadores de nuestras facturas realizan sea el correcto. 2, que para nosotros es el más importante, que los baremos y herramientas de valoración que estamos utilizando ahora a nivel nacional para valorar los daños materiales en los automóviles sean independientes, sean no arbitrarios, sean transparentes, sean trazables, y con ello los talleres consigamos saber cuánto va a costar o en cuánto vamos a valorar una valoración siempre antes de empezar a trabajar. También abordamos la batería de servicios que prestamos a los clientes para que el NPS y el OSAT, el índice promotor y el Customer Journey de los clientes en su valoración sea muy correcto. ¿Qué pasa con esa batería de servicios que ya no entran en nuestra cuenta de explotación como coste, si se produce un copago o quién paga eso? También el tema de los residuos para la sostenibilidad verde en los talleres ha de ser cargo del pagador de la factura y no asumirlo como coste del taller. Y también, por supuesto, que todas las reparaciones efectuadas de carrocería en el ámbito nacional se acojan siempre a los manuales de reparación de los fabricantes de vehículos.
Caramba, Juan Antonio, abordáis un montón de frentes que tenéis abiertos. Aquí en Ruta 2025 cada semana iremos explorando un poco cómo avanza ProTalleres en este sentido y desgranando un poco, si es posible, dando soluciones o dando afirmaciones a esas soluciones que estáis buscando. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos y, como decimos, cada semana tenemos una cita con ProTalleres.
Gracias a vosotros.
Buenos días, 8 de la mañana. Buenos días, 8 de la mañana. Buenos días, 8 de la mañana. Contiene un recorte también de la inflación importante. Porque ya no hay una máquina de dinero. Venga, venga, que es gratis, que es gratis. Esto es tendencia. La mirada a la actualidad, la sucesión de acontecimientos.
Esto es de locos, ¿eh?
Ir a por los trincones y dejarnos al resto en paz. Pues ya, céntrate.
Esto es una historieta, que no estoy diciendo que sea falso.
Tiene mucho que explicar. Bienvenidos de nuevo a Negocios Televisión.
Bueno, oye, os estoy formando.
Buen día y buen negocio.
buenos días, bienvenidos de nuevo a Negocios Televisión, bienvenidos al espacio de las noticias, pendientes de la última hora, mirando la tensión en Ucrania, pendientes también, por supuesto, de Corea del Sur, las últimas advertencias de la OTAN y la tensión que sigue escalando en Siria. En los próximos minutos se esperan declaraciones de Mark Rutte, el secretario general de la OTAN, de Antony Blinken, el secretario de Estado de Estados Unidos, y del presidente ruso Vladimir Putin. Enseguida vamos a todo esto, pero empezamos mirando precisamente a Rusia. La portavoz del Ministerio de Asuntos Exteriores ruso, María Zakharova, ha respondido a las afirmaciones del secretario general de la OTAN, Mark Rutte, sobre posibles negociaciones desde una posición de fuerza para Ucrania. Recordó que Rutte dijo que hay que asegurarse de que la ayuda militar vaya a Kiev para garantizar que Ucrania, cuando decida entablar conversaciones de paz, lo haga desde una posición de fuerza. Decía Zakharova, no es lógico, es una estupidez absoluta. ¿Qué clase de posiciones negociadoras de Kiev cuando están presionados por británicos y estadounidenses? Y además ha prohibido a nivel legislativo negociar. Además añadía que el propio Zelensky dice constantemente que no imaginan ninguna negociación. También ha hablado el secretario general de la Alianza, Mark Rutte, ha asegurado que los miembros de la OTAN acordaron en una reunión con el ministro de Asuntos Exteriores de Ucrania este martes proporcionar sistemas de defensa aérea para proteger las infraestructuras del país frente a los ataques rusos, y además dice que tiene que ser una prioridad. Rutte vuelve a remarcar el apoyo a Ucrania, dice que hay que hacer todo lo posible. Lo escuchamos.
These systems discussed at the NATO-Ukraine Council, and maybe there were any decisions on this issue. Thank you.
No, this was absolutely discussed. As you know, we try to do everything we can to help Ukraine in making sure they can fight back what the Russians are doing with their full onslaught on Ukraine unprovoked. And at the same time, we have to make sure that whatever air defense we can give them is being supplied to Ukraine. This is happening over the last 2.5 years, all the first 1,000 days.
Decía Rutte que anoche hubo un claro acuerdo en torno a la mesa de que ayudar a Ucrania, en particular con sus infraestructuras, tiene que ser una prioridad. Dice que además confía en que los aliados seguirán en los próximos días y semanas asegurándose de que todo lo que puedan suministrar a Ucrania será suministrado. Precisamente Mark Rutte, en medio de esta cumbre de ministros de Asuntos Exteriores de la OTAN en Bruselas, hace declaraciones en estos momentos. Le escuchamos ya.
Russia is providing North Korea with support for its missile and nuclear programs. These developments could destabilize the Korean Peninsula and even threaten the United States. So Russia's illegal war in Ukraine threatens us all. And that is why we will continue to stand together, Europe and North America, alongside our international partners, to keep our 1 billion people safe. We also had a working dinner of the NATO-Ukraine Council with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha. Ukraine is facing relentless bombardment targeting civilian areas and critical infrastructure. And Russia is making gains along the front line, though at a high cost. This could be Ukraine's most difficult winter since 2022. We discussed what more allies can do to provide critical ammunition and air defenses. As Russia steps up its attacks and expands the war with the aid of North Korean troops and weapons. Allies are working to deliver on the financial pledge of 40 billion euros in security assistance for Ukraine in 2024. And actually, the new command in Wiesbaden, the NATO Security Assistance and Training for Ukraine, to be fully operational by the end of this year. But we must do more than just keep Ukraine in the fight. We must provide enough support to change the trajectory of this conflict once and for all. Yesterday, we were also joined by the new EU High Representative, Kaja Kallas. The EU is an essential partner, and we cooperate on a range of issues, from our support to Ukraine to military mobility and ramping up defense production. I'm looking forward to building on this cooperation. Today, ministers discussed Russia's increasingly aggressive posture, as well as its escalating campaign of hostile actions in NATO countries. We have seen a steep increase of these attacks, and we must hold the perpetrators to account. Both Russia and China have tried to destabilize our countries and divide our societies with acts of sabotage, cyber attacks, and energy blackmail. So today, ministers agreed a set of proactive measures to counter Russia's hostile and cyber activities. These include enhanced intelligence exchange, more exercises, better protection of critical infrastructure, improved cyber defense, and tougher action against Russia's shadow fleet of oil exporting ships. And we will work closely together with the EU on these issues. And with that, I'm ready to take your questions.
Thank you. We'll start with Interfax in the middle there.
Thank you, Farah. Goedemiddag, Secretary General, News Agency Interfax, Ukraine. Irina Schumer, you just said that it's not enough to support Ukraine, but we have to provide assistance which change trajectory of this war. Actually, what do you mean concretely? And second question, if I may, of course, this weekend, this Sunday, President of Ukraine, Zelensky, during the press conference with a new president of European Council, Costa, said that he wants to see at the negotiation table with Russia, EU, and NATO. I'm not asking you about this negotiation. We heard you yesterday.
Pendientes de más Rutte del secretario general de la OTAN hablando sobre un cambio en la trayectoria de este conflicto. Dice que hay que hacer más para apoyar a Ucrania, mientras precisamente miramos al otro bando, miramos a Rusia, que quiere lanzar una nueva ofensiva en Gerson. Es lo que apunta Galoiter Prokudin. Según él, los rusos han reunido 300 barcos para cruzar el río Dnieper. El portavoz del ejército voluntario ucraniano dijo que los rusos siguen intentando ocupar las islas del Dnieper para acercarse a la orilla occidental de Gerson. Recientemente llevaron a cabo un ataque a gran escala en la isla Kazatsky, cerca de Nova Kakhovka. Dice además que funcionarios ucranianos sospechan que el ataque a Gerson es parte del plan de Rusia para aumentar la presión sobre Kiev antes de la llegada de Donald Trump. Precisamente Volodymyr Zelensky pidió este martes un importante refuerzo de sectores en el este de Ucrania, de la línea del frente de 1000 kilómetros, donde las fuerzas rusas han logrado avances consistentes en los últimos meses. Zelensky emitió su llamamiento cuando el Ministerio de Defensa de Rusia dijo que sus tropas habían capturado 2 nuevas aldeas de primera línea, una en la región de Donetsk, el principal foco de la guerra que dura ya 33 meses, y la otra más al sur, en la región de Zaporilla. Precisamente las autoridades ucranianas informaron este miércoles de un ataque contra una de las bases aéreas clave de la aviación rusa y aseguraron haber golpeado también un puerto del Mar Negro que alberga a buques rusos portamisiles que atacan regularmente territorio ucraniano. Dicen que hubo ataques a la base aérea de Yagilev, una de las bases aéreas clave de la aviación estratégica de Rusia, es lo que apuntaba en su canal de Telegram el jefe del Centro contra la Desinformación y del Consejo de Seguridad Nacional y Defensa de Ucrania, Andrei Kovarenko. La región de Riazán se encuentra a 200 kilómetros de Moscú. Dice además que el puerto de Novorossiysk, donde la Federación Rusa tiene portamisiles que participan en los bombardeos contra Ucrania, ha sido atacada, es lo que agregaba Kovalenko en su mensaje, sin dar detalles del armamento utilizado en estos ataques. También miramos a Donald Trump, y es que Reuters ha analizado las propuestas de los asesores del presidente electo de Estados Unidos, Donald Trump, que sugieren que se podría entregar a Rusia una parte importante del territorio de Ucrania, capturado como resultado del conflicto militar. Dice que los asesores de Trump intentarían obligar a Moscú y Kiev a negociar con incentivos y amenazas, incluyendo suspender la ayuda militar a Kiev, a menos que acepte dialogar, pero aumentar la asistencia si Vladimir Putin se niega. Según la investigación, la sugerencia de 3 asesores principales, en particular de Keith Kellogg, de representante especial de Trump para la guerra ruso-ucraniana, comparten componentes comunes, a saber, la eliminación de la membresía de Ucrania en la OTAN. Según la CIA, las palabras de los asesores de Trump brindan una idea de los posibles parámetros de su plan de paz. El presidente ucraniano, Volodymyr Zelensky, que enfrenta escasez de personal y crecientes pérdidas de territorio, ha indicado que podría estar dispuesto a negociar. Precisamente las autoridades ucranianas, miembros de la Unión Europea y algunos legisladores de Estados Unidos se opondrán a las propuestas del jefe electo de la administración estadounidense, Donald Trump, para resolver este conflicto, ya que el posible plan no incluiría la adhesión de Ucrania a la OTAN. Esta opinión la expresan analistas y oficiales de inteligencia, según informa la agencia Reuters. Cabe señalar que, en su opinión, las propuestas de Trump enfrentarán la oposición de Zelensky, quien identificó la adhesión de Ucrania a la OTAN como un punto clave de su propio plan de victoria. Los dirigentes de los países de la Unión Europea y el Congreso de Estados Unidos también pondrán obstáculos al jefe de la Casa Blanca, de modo que un acuerdo con Rusia resulte inalcanzable y las hostilidades continúen. La agencia Reuters agregaba que, como resultado, Trump puede tener menos influencia de la que esperaba para obligar a Kiev a sentarse en la mesa de negociaciones, ya que los aliados de Ucrania han expresado su voluntad de aumentar la ayuda militar y el actual presidente de Estados Unidos, Joe Biden, continúa enviando armas para luchar contra Rusia. También miramos al periodista estadounidense Tucker Carlson. Ha llegado a Rusia para entrevistar al ministro de Exteriores Sergei Lavrov tan solo 10 meses después de visitar ese país para grabar otra entrevista con el líder ruso Vladimir Putin. Es lo que confirmaba el propio presentador. Estamos de vuelta en Moscú. Así empezaba un vídeo desde la capital rusa subido hoy a su cuenta en X. Carlson, próximo al presidente electo de Estados Unidos, Donald Trump, agrega que acaba de realizar una entrevista fascinante que se emitirá muy pronto. La portavoz del Ministerio de Asuntos Exteriores de Rusia, María Zakharova, confirmó en su cuenta de Telegram que el reportero conversó con el jefe de la diplomacia rusa. También dijo que actualmente la entrevista, que duró más de una hora, se encuentra en proceso de edición y traducción. Decían que creen que verá la luz en unos días. También miramos a Alemania. La ministra alemana de Exteriores, Annalena Baerbock, subrayaba este miércoles la necesidad de actuar de manera conjunta contra los ataques híbridos con los que Rusia, dice, intenta sacudir las sociedades democráticas en Europa, al tiempo que destacó la importancia de invertir en seguridad. En declaraciones en la segunda jornada de la reunión de ministros de Exteriores de la OTAN, Baerbock ha declarado que el presidente ruso, Vladimir Putin, está librando una guerra híbrida de agresión con ataques híbridos también contra el orden de paz europeo, y se mostró convencida de que el firme apoyo a la paz en Ucrania es la mejor autoprotección para la propia paz en Europa. Se refirió a incidentes como cables de telecomunicación cortados en el Báltico o al accidente de un avión de carga de DHL en Lituania, destacando la importancia de la cooperación entre los servicios de inteligencia. También pendientes de la tensión en Corea del Sur, con el ministro de Defensa Nacional, Kim Jong-un, ha presentado este miércoles su renuncia en medio de la agitación política que estalló en el país después de que el presidente Yoon Suk-yeol declarara lo que resultó ser una ley marcial de corta duración. En un mensaje de texto enviado a los medios, Kim se disculpó por los hechos y asumió la responsabilidad en su participación en ellos tras los informes de que sugirió directamente la introducción de la ley marcial. Previamente, 6 partidos parlamentarios de la oposición surcoreana presentaron una moción a la Asamblea Nacional para destituir a Yoon. Mientras tanto, varios de los principales asesores de Yoon habrían dimitido debido a esta polémica. Corea del Sur, que precisamente trata de recuperarse del caos provocado por el discurso del presidente en el que declaraba la ley marcial. Yoon afirmaba que los partidos de oposición habían tomado como rehén el proceso parlamentario. No mencionó ninguna amenaza específica de Corea del Norte y se centró en sus oponentes políticos internos. Pendientes de esta tensión en Corea del Sur, de este anuncio de la ley marcial por parte de su presidente, precisamente nos hacemos eco de las palabras del propio Yoon Suk-yeol. Daba marcha atrás después de su amenaza de imponer la ley marcial, horas después de desencadenar una crisis política en el país del este asiático. El fiscal jefe de la línea dura advertía que levantaría la ley marcial de emergencia que había anunciado el martes por la noche para eliminar las fuerzas antiestatales lo más rápido posible y normalizar el país. El decreto fue rechazado por unanimidad por los miembros de la Asamblea Nacional de Corea del Sur.
국회의 의결에 따라 대통령은 즉시 비상계엄을 해제해야 합니다. 이제 비상계엄 선포는 무효입니다. 국민 여러분께서는 안심하시기 바랍니다. 국회는 국민과 함께 민주주의를 지키겠습니다. 국회 경내에 들어와 있는 군경은 당장 국회 바깥으로 나가주시기 바랍니다.
También miramos a la reacción por parte de la OTAN. Mark Rutte, el secretario general, decía que Corea del Sur es un aliado clave en el Indo-Pacífico, que además están siguiendo muy de cerca los acontecimientos. Dice que es parte de su asociación con Corea, Japón, Australia y Nueva Zelanda. Significa que están muy interesados en cómo se desarrolla esto, pero ha evitado comentar sobre cuestiones internas. Escuchamos a Mark Rutte.
Again, what we know is what you know and what we see on television. We are really following the events in the Republic of Korea and South Korea step by step, and we are very much interested in how this will evolve further. I don't want to comment now because the Koreans are themselves at this moment trying to stabilize the situation. And if necessary, you will hear more from me, but you can be assured that for us, that relationship with South Korea is key. Our relationship is ironclad, together with Japan, Australia, New Zealand. That will not change.
Pendientes también de la reacción por parte de Rusia, pide la dimisión de Macron, de Yoon, en medio también de la tensión política en Francia. Hoy moción de censura, moción de confianza, a eso de las 4 de la tarde. Hacemos una pausa, 2 minutos y les contamos todo en Negocios Televisión.
Pensamos que la economía mundial no se encamina hacia una recesión inminente y vemos señales de que nos encontramos más ante una rotación que ante un desplome. Bajo esta coyuntura, estos son los 3 factores a monitorizar en este cuarto trimestre del 2024. En primer lugar, los datos de los últimos meses indican que la inflación por fin se ha controlado en su mayor parte y que los riesgos de esta inflación del año pasado se han aplacado. En segundo lugar, vemos que la dirección está clara. Nos encaminamos hacia un ciclo de nuevos estímulos monetarios y públicos que tratarán de amortiguar los posibles baches de la economía. En este entorno, pensamos que los valores de mediana capitalización de Estados Unidos y la deuda pública de los mercados emergentes son 2 de las áreas que registrarán un buen comportamiento. Y por último, creemos que nos encontramos en la fase media final del ciclo y que, pese a la gran incógnita que supone la complejidad de los riesgos geopolíticos, lo más probable es que nos dirijamos hacia un aterrizaje suave.
En el corazón de Madrid, descubre los Montes de Galicia, donde la tradición gallega se encuentra con la innovación culinaria. Saborea nuestros mariscos frescos, carnes jugosas y postres caseros. Todo preparado con ingredientes de la más alta calidad. Disfruta de una experiencia gastronómica única en un ambiente acogedor y elegante. Los Montes de Galicia, donde cada comida es una celebración. ¡Te esperamos!
Seguimos en Negocios Televisión, pendientes de la tensión en Corea del Sur, también de las reacciones internacionales. Miramos a Rusia. El vicepresidente del Consejo de Seguridad ruso, Dmitry Medvedev, pidió este miércoles la dimisión del presidente francés Emmanuel Macron y del presidente surcoreano Yoon Suk-yeol, citando la turbulencia política que se está desarrollando actualmente en ambas naciones. En Telegram calificó al presidente surcoreano de traidor, supuestamente respaldado por Estados Unidos, al tiempo que tachó a Macron de debilucho, incapaz de gestionar la crisis gubernamental de su país. Ambos, afirmó, deben irse, extendiendo sus críticas a la presidenta georgiana Salomé Zurabishvili y al presidente ucraniano Volodymyr Zelensky, subrayando que Washington también les apoya. Dice que el líder caducado ucraniano solo tiene 2 opciones al dejar el cargo: la vergonzosa emigración política o la ejecución pública. También en reacción por parte del gobierno de Estados Unidos ha mostrado su preocupación por los recientes acontecimientos en Corea del Sur. Tras la declaración de ley marcial en el país, afirmó que Seúl no notificó previamente a Washington sobre esta medida. Escuchamos al portavoz adjunto del Departamento de Estado, Vedant Patel.
We are watching the recent developments in the ROK with grave concern. We are seeking to engage with our Republic of Korea counterparts at every level, both here in the United States and in Seoul. The Secretary has been briefed, and we're keeping him appraised of the developments, as well as monitoring closely what's happening on the ground.
Precisamente Estados Unidos, el principal aliado de Corea del Sur, pospuso indefinidamente las reuniones del Grupo Consultivo Nuclear y los ejercicios militares de mesa relacionados, según apunta un funcionario estadounidense, hablando bajo condición de anonimato. También se han planteado dudas sobre una posible visita la próxima semana del secretario de Defensa estadounidense, Lloyd Austin. Los medios japoneses informaron que tenía previsto reunirse con sus homólogos surcoreano y japonés como parte de los esfuerzos trilaterales promovidos por el propio Yoon. De hecho, el ministro de Defensa de Japón, Nakatani, según acabamos de conocer, pospone su visita a Corea del Sur. Es lo que informa en estos momentos Kyodo News. También pendientes de la tensión política en Francia, Barnier ha llamado a la responsabilidad para que no le muevan del cargo. Hablaba y defendía su labor en pro de la estabilidad y señalando que la situación económica y la de los mercados es grave. Pese a esa solicitud, no cambia nada la escena. Este miércoles, a eso de las 4 de la tarde, hora peninsular, será sometido a moción de censura y desde el partido de Le Pen se han decidido a apoyar el derribo del gobierno. Escuchamos las explicaciones de Michel Barnier.
La situation est difficile sur le plan budgétaire, sur le plan financier. Je suis aussi très vigilant sur les marchés financiers que je connais assez bien. Très difficile sur le plan économique et social, je viens de vous le dire. Il y a une chose dont je suis sûr, M. Sassaigne, je suis sûr, et retenez bien ce que je vous dis aujourd'hui, c'est que la censure dont il est question demain, et nous retrouverons, rendra tout plus difficile et plus grave.
Precisamente declaraciones en estos momentos por parte del líder de reagrupación nacional, Jordan Bardella. Ha advertido este miércoles que la propuesta de presupuesto para 2025 podría empujar a Francia a una gran recesión y debilitar el poder adquisitivo de la mayoría de sus ciudadanos. Dice literalmente, por lo tanto asumo mi responsabilidad y las promesas que hicimos a nuestros electores, es decir, protegerlos. Al expresar esta desconfianza en el gobierno, les estamos protegiendo. Eso que apuntaba a los periodistas antes del voto de confianza de la oposición al gobierno del primer ministro Michel Barnier. También miramos a Siria con declaraciones por parte de la portavoz del Ministerio de Asuntos Exteriores de Rusia, María Zaharova. Afirmaba este miércoles que en el actual resurgimiento de los rebeldes en la guerra en Siria hay huellas ucranianas y que en el conflicto están implicados muchos militantes extranjeros. Zaharova comentó la crisis política en Corea del Sur y dijo que Rusia la observa con preocupación. Escuchamos declaraciones de Zaharova.
Instead, Ukraine is turning into a terrorist state. At the very least, it is something we can say about the regime at the helm there. The Ukrainian Nazis, with a blatant complicity of the West, are not ceasing their terrorist activities against their own residents and against Russia. On the 26th of November, in Novaya Kakhovka, Kherson region, 5 civilians were killed and 21 wounded as a result of terrorist shelling of a bus. A massive drone attack was repelled on the 27th of November in Krasnodar region. In Slavyansk and Kuban, a woman was injured by the wreckage of a destroyed drone on 27th of November. Over the waters of the Black Sea and the territory of Crimea, 25 Ukrainian UAVs were intercepted. The Ukraine terrorists fired 345 munitions and 154 UAVs at populated areas in the Belgrade region as a result of drone attacks.
Una Zaharova que expresaba su esperanza de que los acontecimientos actuales no empeoren la situación sociopolítica en la península de Corea, ya que dice se ha complicado por las acciones provocadoras de Estados Unidos y sus aliados. Precisamente Rusia, Irán y Turquía mantienen estrechos contactos sobre el conflicto en Siria, eso que afirma este miércoles Moscú después de que los rebeldes islamistas apoderaran la segunda ciudad de Alepo tras una ofensiva de choque. Dice que los ministros de Asuntos Exteriores de los 3 países garantes, Rusia, Irán y Turquía, mantienen estrechos contactos entre sí. Es lo que declara este miércoles a los periodistas la portavoz del Ministerio de Asuntos Exteriores ruso, María Zaharova. También les contamos que Estados Unidos destruyó este martes varios sistemas de armas en Siria en respuesta a un ataque contra sus posiciones en el este del país, es lo que informaba el Mando Central de Estados Unidos, responsable de las operaciones en Oriente Medio. En un comunicado, el CENTCOM detalló que las fuerzas estadounidenses atacaron 3 lanzacohetes múltiples montados en camiones, un tanque T-64 y un vehículo blindado y varios morteros que representaban una amenaza clara e inminente para las fuerzas estadounidenses y de la coalición que lucha contra el grupo yihadista Estado Islámico. Un ataque estadounidense tuvo lugar después de que estos sistemas de armas fueran usados para disparar contra posiciones de las fuerzas estadounidenses en un enclave militar cerca del Éufrates. Pendientes de la tensión en Siria, esperando al presidente ruso Vladimir Putin, que lo hará en los próximos minutos, conectamos con el secretario general de la OTAN, Umar Rote, que dice que es el invierno más difícil para Ucrania. Escuchamos.
Okay, we'll go to Sabah, second row.
Thank you, Secretary General. I'm from Tunisia, and as you have noticed, there's a lot of journalists from the Middle East.
Right.
Now, I move back to the situation in the Middle East, and you mentioned the participation of King of Jordan in your meetings. So, was there any concrete measures to what's going on in Gaza, where thousands were killed, or ceasefire in Lebanon, the advancement of the militia in Russia? Was there any position of NATO regarding yesterday UN declaration that 157 recognize the Palestinian state? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for this very relevant question. Let me first make clear, of course, and we know all of us and all of you know this, that NATO is a transatlantic defense organization. That means that it doesn't extend to the Middle East. However, we are very much following what's happening there. Of course, NATO is active in some countries on their request to help them building up, for example, their defense forces. Take, for example, the NATO mission in Iraq, but also in other countries in the southern neighborhood. We have very close contact. Of course, with Jordan, we have a very close cooperation. We are going to open an office in Amman early next year to basically facilitate that relationship. And yesterday was an opportunity for us with somebody who is probably more than anyone able to explain what is happening in the region, give his views on this, not to come to decisions, but for us as 32 allies to understand better, to navigate the crisis. We are all very worried, obviously, about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. We applaud the ceasefire in Lebanon, but we should not be naive. Let's hope that the ceasefire holds. But that means that Iran and its proxies have to live up to what they committed in this ceasefire. And Iran also came up in the discussions yesterday, because we know that there is this connection between what is happening in Ukraine and Iran. Of course, China, North Korea, but also Iran. Russia is paying Iran for its help in the war Russia is at this moment deploying against Ukraine through the Shahed drones, missiles. And Iran is getting money for that. And that money is being used to prop up Hamas and other proxies in the Middle East, and to steer conflict even beyond the Middle East. So all of this is getting more and more connected in the Pacific, the Atlantic, and what is happening, of course, in the Middle East. Therefore, that visit of the King of Jordan was extremely important. But obviously, NATO is not involved in providing security directly. As my predecessor said, we cannot end every conflict or be active in every theater, but we are very much involved in a sense that, for example, we are helping out a number of countries in developing their defense capability.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Reuters over there.
Thank you. Secretary General Andrew Grace, Reuters. On defence spending, President-elect Trump said in August that he would insist that every NATO ally spend at least 3% of GDP on defence. He called 2% the steal of the century. You visited President-elect Trump recently. Should all NATO allies now be aiming for that 3% figure?
Let me first of all say that it was President Trump who, after we took a decision in Wilson 2014, when he came on board as president of the US in 2016, 2017, has pushed us to ramp up defense spending. And now NATO, so NATO territory, if you would for a moment exclude the US, is at that 2%. And I think that's to a large part thanks to Trump, also because we feel the need. And particularly the last couple of years, the war in Ukraine has very much advised us to do more. But it started, and I think crucial in all of this has been the Trump push starting in 2016, 2017. And I've said before, not because of Trump, but I believe strongly, and I know many allies believe strongly, that 2% is simply not enough. It is simply not enough if longer term we want to keep our deterrence at the level it is now. Now it is okay. We can now defend ourselves, and nobody should try to attack us. But I want that to stay the same in 4 or 5 years. So that is the debate we will be having. And then the question will be, what should the percentage be? Is that 1%, or would you look at country-specific targets given their capability gaps? That's a debate we will need to have within the alliance. But it is absolutely clear, if you want to keep the deterrence at the present level, 2% is not enough. And then to expand on that, the defense industrial base, we are produced not enough at too high prices. And the delivery is too slow. So defense industry needs to put in more ships, needs to put in more production lines. We cannot have a situation where we just pay more for the same. And we see large kickbacks to the shareholders. And that's the debate we are having with the defense industry. And that is why this transatlantic cooperation from Turkey up to the US and all the defense industrial companies in the European Union, we need to work closely together to make sure that we produce at a much higher rate and at an acceptable price. And I know that most of the CEOs of the defense companies agree with me. And they see, of course, the money going around. And they also see that the South Korean defense industrial base is getting into the market in a number of countries who are now buying South Korean because our own defense companies are not producing at the rate we need.
Okay, thank you. We have to wrap up soon, so I'll take two more questions, one from Al Arabiya and then BBC Russian after that. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Secretary General. You're talking about increasing NATO spending at a time when Europe as a whole is suffering from anemic growth. Germany is the sick of Europe. How do you anticipate these countries are going to pay for that? And are European citizens going to have to take a serious haircut in those next few years? We're talking about 3% to 4% and maybe beyond that. And separately, Emmanuel Macron and Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, have suggested that they will hold a conference on Gaza in June. And with NATO, at least in an advisory role in the region, do you anticipate that you will attend that conference? Thank you.
On the second question, I cannot yet give you the answer. So we have to look into exactly what that conference will be. And I was too busy chairing all these meetings. So we will come back to the second question. On the first question, this is key. And the key issue is this, that if we would agree, and I'm absolutely convinced this is the case, that we cannot stick to 3%, because then we cannot longer term keep our deterrence at the level it is now. That means that we have to spend more. We don't have to spend tens of percentage points. We have to spend more than a 2%. It will move up to whatever percentage. But when you look what countries are spending on pensions, on the social security system, and on health, you need a fraction of that spending to make sure that the defense spending gets to a level where we can sustain our deterrence longer term. And this is for politicians to decide on. This is making choices and scarcity, because there are always too many demands on the money, which is always limited. This is why you have politicians to, one, make sure that there are enough jobs, that the economy is doing well, and secondly, to keep your country safe. This is about keeping the country safe, to keep the whole of the alliance, all 32 nations, safe for the longer term. And if then the outcome would be that we would stick to the 2%, because we somehow, and I would find this very strange, is that would be the outcome. I don't accept it and I don't expect it. But if the outcome would be we will stick to the 2%, then that is a deliberate choice. Politicians have to explain to their voters. But if we will get to what I expect and will fight for, spend much more than the 2%, because we have to keep our deterrence at a level where we can keep our alliance safe. And we are a defensive alliance, and let me stress that again, and an alliance based on values and democracy. We want to keep that alliance safe long term. I'm convinced we'll take good decisions over the next month. It will be a difficult debate, and I also will try myself to reach out to the 1 billion people living in NATO territory, to also explain directly to them in a step-by-step approach why this is necessary, and therefore also maybe helping a bit the political debates in some of these countries.
Okay, thank you. Last one to BBC Russian, and then it's a wrap. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Secretary General. Good afternoon. BBC Russian. So you've mentioned yesterday that Vladimir Putin is advancing his goals in Ukraine, that he is moving the front line now from the east to the west. And we clearly see that even though he didn't probably reach all of his goals, he's not losing yet. So what do you think could stop him from advancing his goals both in Ukraine and outside the country, as you mentioned, other hybrid threats from Russia? Thank you.
Well, this is about the first question, changing the trajectory and making sure that we do everything to prop up Ukraine and get as much as possible, of course, air defense systems into Ukraine, particularly focusing on the energy grid, but also getting the offensive weapons into Ukraine so that they can fight back. And we have to make sure that they get trained. We have to make sure, obviously, also that enough people are available within Ukraine. This is a debate Ukraine needs to have internally. But we need to do all of these three things at the same time, making sure they are trained. I commend what France has been doing with the End of Kiev brigades being trained in France. Of course, we need probably more people to move to the front line, but particularly we, as an alliance, have to make sure that Ukraine, all allies working on this, has what it takes to get to a position of strength, that when that day comes, when they want to start talks, that Ukraine is willing to do that, and that Putin realizes that there is no escape. You get emotional because my last words. And I understand that. She wanted to say thank you so much. And, see you next time. Bye-bye. Maybe.
¿Qué cuento quieres hoy? ¿Te cuento uno de los míos? ¿El del farmacéutico? ¿O el de María, la abogada?
El de Ana, la arquitecta.
Vale. Eres una niña que soñaba con crear los edificios más impresionantes de la Tierra. Se pasaba el día dibujándolos. Sabía que algún día acabarían llegando a lo más alto de cada ciudad. Y que cualquier persona...
Cada profesional tiene detrás una historia increíble. Creer en ella es lo que de verdad cuenta. Arquia Banca, el banco de los profesionales.
Silver Gold Patrimonio nace en 2018 con el objetivo de innovar en el mercado de los metales preciosos de inversión, ofreciendo nuevas alternativas para que cualquier persona, familia o empresa pueda entrar en el fantástico mundo de los metales de inversión de forma sencilla y acompañada por consultores expertos en el sector. Silver Gold Patrimonio quiere avanzar contigo.
Recibes un mensaje alarmante de tu inquilino en el que te informa que no puede pagar el alquiler. No te preocupes, SEAC está aquí para ayudarte. Nuestro equipo te asegura que recibirás tu renta a tiempo. Con SEAC, tu renta está protegida. Recibes el ingreso en tu cuenta como siempre. Disfruta de la tranquilidad sabiendo que SEAC maneja el imprevisto por ti. Alquila tranquilo. SEAC responde.
Ya estamos en Negocios de Televisión de vuelta, analizando oportunidades de inversión, muy pendientes de la geopolítica, de las tensiones, de esa escalada en Ucrania y esos ministros de Exteriores de la OTAN ratificando el apoyo a Ucrania. Mientras tanto, tenemos que centrarnos en las carteras, en la inversión. Hablamos con Óscar del Diego, director de análisis de Ibercaja Gestión. ¿Qué tal? Muy buenas.
Buenos días, Manuel. Encantado de estar aquí por primera vez en vuestro plato.
Un placer y bienvenido. ¿Cuál es el momentum del mercado, Óscar? ¿En qué situación nos encontramos? Nos enfrentamos a un 2025 en el que, bueno, pues parece que hay cierto miedo, pero los mercados han reaccionado al alza, han hecho un año en general bueno en Europa, incluso los mercados asiáticos, a pesar de algunos vaivenes con, bueno, pues con la política fiscal china, por supuesto la crisis en Corea del Sur, en fin, el momentum del mercado,
Bueno,
Óscar.
el susto de hoy con la crisis de Corea del Sur ha sido bastante importante, a ver cómo acaban las cosas. En principio, vamos a completar un año muy bueno tanto para los activos de renta variable como para los activos de renta fija, y esa tendencia ya venía positiva antes de Trump, ¿no? A Trump elimina una de las incertidumbres que teníamos, que es quién va a gobernar Estados Unidos durante los próximos 4 años, y eso es positivo ya en el sentido de tener una incertidumbre menos. Sabemos que las políticas de Trump, unas son pro crecimiento y otras no tanto. Los libros de texto nos dicen que tienen efectos, pues, por ejemplo, los aranceles tienen efectos negativos para el crecimiento de la economía global y además son inflacionarias, ¿no? Con lo cual veremos un poco cómo va el año que viene. Como digo, la tendencia macro era positiva y se espera que siga siendo positiva. Nadie ya habla de estancamiento para el año que viene. Todo el mundo piensa que va a ser un año como este o mejor en cuanto a crecimiento. Sí que es verdad que va a haber bastante volatilidad en cuanto a la toma de medidas de Trump, ¿no? A ver en qué se concreta todo lo que ha prometido en las elecciones. Con lo cual vemos un año en principio positivo, con muchas incógnitas.
Con muchas incógnitas, como una de ellas podría ser la inflación, que podría en este caso perjudicar con esas políticas proteccionistas en principio por parte de Donald Trump, y no sé si también podría alterar la hoja de ruta de la Reserva Federal. ¿Vuestra previsión sobre Estados Unidos?
La Reserva Federal creemos que va a bajar menos los tipos que el BCE el año que viene. motivado por la mejor crecimiento económico y porque los niveles de inflación, como tú bien dices, pues deberían repuntar alrededor de mitad del año que viene. Con lo cual, esperamos que baje ahora tipos la semana que viene, no, sí, la semana que viene es, no, la siguiente, y esperamos que baje otras 2 veces más, por lo menos, en el primer semestre, para luego ver un poco cómo están los datos allí y seguir. Lo normal sería que se tomase un descanso. Pero depende de las medidas de Trump.
Dependerá de las medidas de Trump, que bueno, pues parece que está intentando implementar con bastante premura muchas de sus políticas. De momento, bueno, todavía no hemos llegado a esa toma de posesión ni a 2025. En cuanto al Banco Central Europeo, ¿tú crees, como algunos analistas esperan, hasta 5 bajadas de tipos de interés en 2025?
El mercado está ahora esperando más de 6.
Más de 6.
Bueno, depende si cuentas la de diciembre, ¿no? 6 en los próximos 12 meses. Nosotros creemos que puede andar por ahí. Dependerá también de los datos de inflación, pero creemos que andará por ahí. La idea sería dejar los tipos en la zona neutral, que sería entre el 1,75 y el 2% a finales del año que viene, ¿no? Eso sería un poco el horizonte. Y dependiendo de los datos, pues tendríamos que irnos hacia zona expansiva. Debería el BCE irse hacia zona expansiva, que sería por debajo de ese 1,75-2. Recordemos que todavía estamos en zona supuestamente de política monetaria restrictiva.
Lógicamente hay otros problemas en el seno de la eurozona y de ahí que haya que pisar el acelerador con mayor fuerza respecto de Estados Unidos. Vuestra posición en Ibercaja respecto a China, por un lado, bueno, al conjunto de Asia. Por un lado tenemos ese galopante problema de endeudamiento en las economías locales y también a nivel estatal por parte de China, planes fiscales que parece que no han convencido al mercado, aún así el balance todavía, creo, estoy hablando de memoria, creo que es más 12% Shanghái y Hong Kong. También hay algunos otros problemas en Corea del Sur que esperemos que se solucionen. No sé cuál es la posición de Ibercaja Gestión respecto a Asia. No sé si estáis posicionados.
Bueno, tenemos un vehículo de inversión en China que este año se está comportando bastante bien, como tú dices, aunque todo lo que no sea Estados Unidos este año pues se ha quedado detrás de los índices globales. Creemos que está infravalorada, que es una oportunidad para invertir a largo plazo, pero que las incertidumbres el año que viene en China no se van a resolver, ¿no? Creemos que sí que puede coger algo de tracción las políticas fiscales y regulatorias chinas el año que viene, pero que simplemente van a compensar los efectos negativos de las subidas de tarifas de Trump, ¿no? Entonces, en principio, valoración atractiva, pero con no una oportunidad clarísima a corto plazo.
Hay que ser selectivos en el continente asiático, en China, y es un mercado inmenso. Mientras tanto, bueno, has dicho, Óscar, que 2025 puede ser igual o incluso mejor para los mercados, para la renta variable. En ese sentido, ¿qué estrategia tenemos que jugar o qué estrategia jugáis desde Ibercaja Gestión para un 2025 triunfador? ¿Qué porcentaje de renta variable, qué regiones, qué sectores?
Primero, creemos que va a ser un poco mejor o igual en lo que es evolución del PIB. Evolución de bolsas sería repetir 3 años seguidos un más 25%, sería mucho pedir. Ha pasado, ha habido otras ocasiones en las que ha pasado, pero sería mucho pedir. Creemos que hay que seguir estando en carteras globales, con bastante peso en Estados Unidos, a pesar de que la valoración de los índices principales americanos es bastante elevada. Creemos que buen peso tiene que estar en carteras globales y con bastante peso en Estados Unidos. Hay que buscar también oportunidades fuera de lo que son los grandes valores, en carteras pues, de medianas compañías americanas, por ejemplo. Hay que tener también, yo creo que estrategias de ingresos son interesantes para el año que viene en las carteras, estrategias que nos den dividendos recurrentes y crecientes, una cartera, digamos, más defensiva en lo que es la renta variable para, por si acaso hay volatilidad, estar invertidos en renta variable, pero con un sesgo algo más defensivo.
Y, por cierto, ya para terminar, ¿qué peso le daríamos en este caso a la renta fija en las carteras o las oportunidades de renta fija con este ciclo de tipos de interés, lógicamente, que van a ir más bajos.
De todas maneras, todavía creemos que hay que darle un peso importante en las carteras a la renta fija, igual que hemos dicho al equity de ingresos más defensivo. Creemos que la renta fija tiene que tener un peso que deberíamos ir alargando cuando nos da oportunidades el mercado. Por ejemplo, pues esta primavera pasada o en octubre también tuvimos una oportunidad para alargar duraciones de las carteras, que tenemos que aprovechar esos momentos todavía para alargar un poco las duraciones y seguiríamos teniendo bastante peso en renta fija. Como digo, 3 años seguidos de más 25 es difícil. Si hay crecimiento global, lo normal es que las bolsas lo hagan bien, el equity es el activo ganador, pero también la renta fija nos está dando ese soporte para las carteras mixtas.
Pues Óscar del Diego, director de análisis de Ibercaja Gestión, gracias por tu visión y por esta estrategia de mercados para un 2025 igual o puede que incluso mejor en términos de crecimiento para la economía global. Gracias.
Muchísimas gracias a ti.
Y es el momento de irnos a publicidad y continuamos dentro de un minuto en Negocios Televisión.
¿Te preocupa que tu inquilino no pague el alquiler? Sabemos que esto puede ser un desafío. Aunque los gastos son fáciles de calcular, el verdadero reto es gestionar la falta de pago por parte del inquilino. SEAC te ofrece una garantía de renta asegurada hasta que recuperes tu vivienda pase el tiempo que pase. Relájate. SEAC se encarga de todo. Alquila tranquilo. SEAC responde.
No puede volver atrás y cambiar el principio, pero puede comenzar donde está y cambiar el final. En Luna Sevilla queremos ser su asesor financiero de referencia para mejorar su presente y su futuro patrimonial, prestando nuestros servicios como agentes de Caser Asesores Financieros. Somos una empresa con una clara apuesta por la formación de calidad, la información transparente y objetiva, y por el asesoramiento financiero personalizado y continuado. Visite nuestra web lunasevilla.es o llame al 91 762 3442. Ven al Torreón, estamos en El Pardo, un espacio único en plena naturaleza. Disfruta de momentos de desconexión mientras saboreas la mejor gastronomía. Disponemos de 7 amplias terrazas y salones para todo tipo de eventos. Degusta nuestros exquisitos platos acompañados de una selecta bodega de vinos. A tu servicio, un gran parking y zona infantil. Abierto los 365 días del año. Cocina ininterrumpida desde las 10 de la mañana hasta las 12 de la noche. Haz tu reserva.
Buenos días, 8 de la mañana. Buenos días, 8 de la mañana. Buenos días, 8 de la mañana. Pues tiene un recorte también de la inflación importante. Pero venga, que es gratis, que es gratis. Esto es tendencia. La mirada a la actualidad, la sucesión de acontecimientos.
Esto es de locos, ¿eh?
Ir a por los trincones y dejarnos al resto en paz.
Pues ya, céntrate.
Esto es una historieta, que no estoy diciendo que sea falso.
Tiene mucho que explicar. ¿Estás tu casa? Bienvenidos de nuevo a Negocios Televisión.
Bueno, oye, os estoy formando.
Buen día y buen negocio.
De vuelta en Negocios Televisión, analizando los mercados, las estrategias de inversión y siguiendo muy de cerca la actualidad en el viejo continente, muy pendientes de Ucrania, de Rusia, de la moción de censura a la que se enfrenta el primer ministro francés Michel Barnier. Mientras tanto, ahora nos vamos a otro parlamento, el Parlamento británico, donde se espera que rinda cuentas el premier Keir Starmer.
Post office in Tesco's in the middle of Liverpool. Can I recommend this procedure's approach in terms of regenerating town centres to the front bench? Opposite.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We're delighted to receive representations of all sorts about how to improve our town centres, but we do know that they have suffered neglect for far too long. And as I say, I'm hoping that all Scottish MPs will have been lobbying for the kind of support to our leisure, hospitality and retail sector that this Labour government has already given south of the border.
John Lamell. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 5.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I firstly pay tribute to the honourable gentleman, my predecessor. I know he will continue to represent his constituents assiduously from the backbenches. Both the Secretary of State and I will be working closely with the Department for Transport and the Scottish Government to make sure that cross-border connectivity remains a top priority for this government.
Well, Mr. Speaker, extending the Borders Railway to Hawick, Newcastle and on to Carlisle will boost jobs, help the local economy and improve social mobility. The funding for the feasibility study was agreed by the last Conservative government with the SNP administration in Edinburgh, but the new Labour government seems to push this into the railway siding. So will the Minister ensure that the funding for the feasibility study is released as soon as possible?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK Government is fully committed to the Borderlands Growth Deal, which will deliver economic growth for the south of Scotland and beyond, a key mission of this Government. The Scotland Office continues to work with the Department for Transport, the Scottish Government and Borderlands partners on the next stage of the business case development for the Tweedbank-Carlisle corridor and feasibility options to extend Borders Railway. It is unfortunately ultimately in the hands of Transport Scotland and the Scottish Government to follow through on the delivery of this important project.
Secretary of State Andrew Bowen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I echo the words of the Minister regarding her predecessor and indeed my predecessor as Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland and the work that he has done. One of the decisions taken by the previous government, of which I am most proud, was the halving of air passenger duty, which led to cheaper flights and increased routes across the United Kingdom. With airlines already cutting back on routes as a result of their government's decision to hike APD, people who don't live within a few-hour train journey to London, such as Aberdeen, face higher fares and fewer options for travel. So how can they credibly claim to support better transport connectivity across the United Kingdom when those living outside the Central Belt, and I know Labour do need to be reminded that does exist, are being punished?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable gentleman will know that we face a climate emergency and indeed an economic emergency of his government's own making. We were faced with a 22 billion black hole, with Treasury reserves spent 3 times over in the first few months of the government. We've taken tough choices to try and deal with the economic inheritance we've received.
Right, McNally.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I will answer questions 6 and 12 together. We have reset the relationship with the Scottish Government and have met with the Deputy First Minister multiple times to discuss the autumn budget and other issues. From the moment my honourable friend the Chancellor stood up at this dispatch box to the moment she sat down, Scotland was better off by the tune of £4.9 billion in Barnett consequentials alone. Again, something the SNP voted against but will spend today. I encourage the Scottish Government to use that money to strengthen frontline services, bring down NHS waiting times and lift attainment in our schools. There are no more excuses. We ended austerity. It's time they followed.
Right, McNally.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend for that answer. A thriving retail, hospitality and leisure sector is critical to brand Scotland. Following the welcome decision in the budget to ensure 40% rates relief for RHL businesses in England, what guarantees, if any, has my right honourable friend had from the Scottish Government that the extra Barnett consequentials linked to non-domestic rates will be passed on at today's Scottish budget? And does he agree with me that any failure to do so would be deeply damaging to the sector? Thank you to my honourable friend for that question. He is absolutely correct. The UK budget shows investment over decline, including investment directly in my honourable friend's constituency as part of the £200 million Towns Fund, as well as the biggest budget settlement in the history of devolution. He's also right that our hospitality businesses in particular need this rates relief more than ever. The Scottish Government should be using that budget to deliver growth and investment to help our high streets, and passing on these reliefs should be the bare minimum from the Scottish Government.
Irene Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have delivered the biggest budget settlement to the Scottish Government in the history of devolution, with more than 4.9 billion, as you've heard today, of extra funding that can go to public services. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that there are no more excuses for the SNP and that Scots expect and deserve delivery and improvement to our public services?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, I couldn't agree more. It's not just the £4.9 billion in Barnett consequences, but all the other investment the UK government made outside those Barnett consequences. The Labour government has delivered billions of pounds more for schools and hospitals in Scotland. Mr. Speaker, it's more money than ever before, but the SNP MPs voted against it. They voted to deny Holyrood its biggest ever budget settlement by voting against the finance bill last week, but of course they will happily spend it in their budget today. They also voted against GB Energy in the SNP leader's own constituency. Given what we've read about the SNP's selection processes, I guess the SNP MPs seem keener to send themselves to Holyrood than billions of pounds of extra funding.
Brendan O'Hara. Speaker, I'm sure the pensioners in the Secretary of State's constituency are as relieved as those in Argyll, Bute and South Lochaber that the Scottish Government's budget will introduce a pension age winter heating payment for all Scottish pensioners. The SNP government is doing the right thing by Scottish pensioners. So will he join me in urging the Labour government here at Westminster to also do the right thing by the pensioners of England and Wales and give back to them their winter fuel allowance as well?
Mr. Speaker, what the honourable gentleman has just proved is the winter fuel payment in Scotland is actually devolved.
The consequences of the budget was to remove £5 million of regeneration funding for Perth city centre. We got practically nothing from their levelling up fund, save this paltry £5 million that he is even taking away. Just what is it that UK government has against the city of Perth?
Mr. Speaker, no projects have been cancelled. The Perth deal is being under consideration by MHCLG and the Treasury. It hasn't been cancelled, it has been merely paused. But what I would say is that the honourable gentleman should speak to his colleagues in the Scottish Government, who've got £4.9 billion extra in Barnett consequentials to spend today, and perhaps he could even have a chat with some of his colleagues sitting next to him who seem happier in Holyrood than they are here.
Seamus Logan. Question number 7, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know there is consensus right across this House on the enormous value of the hospice sector and the extraordinary work that they do, work which has been sadly undervalued for far too long. Support for the additional employer national insurance contributions will be allocated to departments, with the Barnett formula applying in the usual way for devolved governments. The rise does not begin until April, and we'll set out further details on the allocation of funding in due course.
Thank you. Good night. Seamus Logan.
Oh, Seamus.
Mr. Speaker, there are 45 hospices in Scotland. I can't be certain of that figure because so many of them are in dire financial circumstances. I think of Roxburgh House in Aberdeen, which provides services to my constituents and to other MPs in this Chamber's constituents. Another organisation that provides vital hospice care is the Marie Curie charity, which provides services in Edinburgh and Glasgow, and they also provide hospice at home care. They are facing a bill close to £3 million as a result of decisions by this government. So what does the Minister have to say in relation to help that can be provided to Marie Curie and other organisations?
Good question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the honourable gentleman will know, the pressures on hospice funding long predate the budget and relate to declining real terms funding from the Scottish Government. I note that nearly 5,000 members of the public have written to the Scottish Government recently to support calls from the Scottish Hospice Leadership Group for fair funding. Those calls might be answered this afternoon, where the SNP government has to spend an extra £5 billion, secured by Scottish Labour MPs, voted against by SNP MPs, and spent this afternoon by SNP ministers. Make it make sense.
Right, we now come to Prime Minister's questions in room. Question number 1, please, Mr. Speaker. Order. What are these two members playing at? That is absolutely disgraceful for the member. We've started PMQs. Either come in early or at least wait. Please start reading the room. In room.
Question number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to welcome His Highness the Emir of the State of Qatar to the UK, and I look forward to discussions this afternoon on how we're strengthening our relationship and boosting trade and investment, including the announcement today of a £1 billion investment in our new clean energy partnership. Mr. Speaker, Sunday marked World AIDS Day, and we stand with all those that we have lost and those living with HIV today, and we will seek to end new cases of HIV in England by 2030. Mr. Speaker, can I also note that we're joined in the gallery today by Mandy Damari, mother of Emily, a British citizen still being held hostage in Gaza. I've met Mandy a number of times, and in my view, what she's going through is nothing short of torture. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
In room. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to concur with the comments the Prime Minister has just made. North Devon District Hospital is the most remotest hospital in mainland England. Its intensive care unit has only 6 beds, and it's almost 50 years old, and it serves a population of 165,000 people. Can the Prime Minister assure my constituents that their hospital will receive the urgent funding that it's needed under the new hospital programme, so that they will not face over a 2-hour drive to the nearest trauma unit?
Mr. Speaker, the new hospital programme that we inherited was emblematic of the failures of the previous government, making promises with no plan to deliver on them. We are committed to delivery, including the North Devon Hospital. We're reviewing the programme to place it on a sustainable footing, and the Health Secretary will set out further details of the new delivery soon. And in the meantime, we continue to support trusts to develop their schemes. Thank you.
Olivia Bailey.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the swift and decisive action this government is taking to secure our borders after the party opposite lost control? After the party opposite lost control, Mr. Speaker. And in particular, can I welcome the world-first deal struck with Iraq last week to tackle smuggling? Does the Prime Minister agree with me that international cooperation, shared intelligence and joint law enforcement is the best way to end the vile smuggling trade?
I thank my honourable friend. She's a superb champion for her constituents. And she's absolutely right. The previous government left a broken asylum system. We put a plan in place, the Border Security Command, backed by £150 million, 100 more NCA officers, and we're introducing counter-terrorist style powers. And my friend is right that our new international coordination, including the landmark Iraqi agreement. And the hard graft is already beginning to pay off, because 9,400 people who've no right to be here have been returned. That's a 30% increase on the numbers of last year. They promised to get the flights off the ground. We've got them off the ground.
When comes the leader of the opposition,
Mr. Speaker, if I may, I would like to pay tribute to Mandy Damari and her family for the strength that they have shown. And we on this side of the House, and I'm sure the whole House, continue to seek the speedy release of Emily Damari and the other hostages. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister talks about immigration. I think it's probably a good time to remind him that he was the one writing letters asking us not to deport foreign criminals. And he and his party voted against every single measure that we put in place to try and limit immigration. But, Mr. Speaker, the question today is what has been on the lips of all Labour MPs, including, I believe, the Health Secretary yesterday. The Prime Minister knowingly appointed a convicted fraudster to be his Transport Secretary. What was he thinking?
Mr. Speaker, the previous Transport Secretary was right when further information came forward to resign. What a marked contrast to behaviour in the last 14 years. And and she talks about immigration, record levels of immigration under the previous government, nearly 1 million. And she was the cheerleader. She was the one urging on the removal of the caps for work visas. She was thanking the previous Home Secretary for the work that was done. She championed it, she advocated it. Record numbers of immigration.
Mr. Speaker, he's obfuscating, but I'm going to keep him on the topic. He owes the House an explanation. He said that the former Transport Secretary was only asked to resign after further information came to light. What was that further information?
I'm not going to disclose private conversations. Further information came to light. The Justice Secretary resigned. As I say, what a marked contrast. Whilst she's obsessing with the Westminster issues, we're getting on with fixing the mess, fixing the foundations, that £22 billion black hole, our prisons bursting. Mr. Speaker, as we found out last week, nearly 1 million net migration numbers because of the Tory open borders policy.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not asking about migration. I'm asking about the former Transport Secretary. He never answers any questions. He never answers any questions. And it looks like he didn't ask his Transport Secretary any questions either. The truth is, he appointed a person convicted of fraud to the cabinet. The first thing she did was bung hundreds of millions of pounds in pay rises to her trade union friends. Wasn't this a fraud on the British people?
No, Mr. Speaker, she says she's not talking about immigration. I'm not surprised. And I advise her in order not to talk about the economy or immigration for another 5 years.
Mr. Speaker, you can try and change the topic as much as he likes, but the public are watching. He owes them an explanation. The country needs conviction politicians, not politicians with convictions. Now on to an even bigger fraud. Now on to an even bigger fraud, the budget. Last week, the Prime Minister failed to repeat the Chancellor's pledge of no more borrowing and no more taxes. It is obvious that they are coming back for more. In his manifesto, he committed to making Britain the fastest growing economy in the G7. Does he stand by his own pledge?
Mr. Speaker, I gently remind her that 2 of her predecessors had convictions for breaking the COVID rules. I'd also invite her to look at the OECD report of this morning, which has upgraded growth for next year and the year after, which now puts us on target to be the highest growing major economy in Europe in the next 2 years. She should welcome that.
Mr. Speaker, I saw the OECD report, and what it said was that they will be coming back for more taxes. And I think the whole House would have heard him fail to repeat his own pledge. He can't even repeat the pledges that he made just a few weeks ago. We are here to stop him from damaging the economy, and that is why we are
I want to hear the question.
Mr. Speaker, they are laughing the same way they all laughed during the budget when they talked about raising NI. They have no idea what people out there are dealing with. And that is why yesterday we voted against his damaging jobs tax. Even former supporters, Chef Tom Kerridge, who endorsed Labour at the election, said that the budget was catastrophic. He built a real business employing young people, unlike his cabinet of trade union stooges, CV embellishers, and an actual fraudster. None of them have ever run a business. Why won't he listen to business who are saying his budget is catastrophic?
Mr. Speaker, I thought the scripted jokes were over, but we had another one about lectures about the economy from the party opposite. They broke the economy, mortgages through the roof, and a £22 billion black hole. And she talks about national insurance. She complains about the rise in national insurance week after week. But then 2 weeks ago, she says that she wouldn't reverse it. she signed trade deals, Mr. Speaker, that had farmers protesting in Whitehall. Now she pretends that she's their champion. She campaigned to remove the cap on migrant worker visas, and now she pretends she's furious about the open borders policy of the last government.
Mr. Speaker, the fact is the Prime Minister has discarded his own Labour leadership promises. He's dropped the 5 missions he said would define his government. He's ditched his pledge to make Britain the fastest growing economy in the G7. We left office with UK the fastest growing economy in the G7. And business is saying he has damaged the economy with his budget. Tomorrow, he's going to have an emergency reset, Mr. Speaker, just 5 months into his premiership. But why should anyone believe a word he says?
Mr. Speaker, the only relaunch on that side of the House is the leadership bids of her rivals. And they she obviously hasn't read the OECD report of this morning, the fastest growth in the next 2 years of any major economy in Europe. We're proud of that. And they should never be allowed to forget the damage they did to our country. They used Britain like some sort of mad scientist experiment. Open borders, unfunded tax cuts, neglected health service. And now, all the madness is still coming out. They say they should be back in office. They haven't listened, they haven't learned, and they certainly haven't changed. There's only one party that's driving this country forward, and that's this Labour government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, question 3, but who knows, next week I could be #1 in the charts. Yeah. As the first MP this year to bring out a Christmas single, will the Prime Minister join me in thanking my musical collaborator, the hugely talented Malco, and everyone involved with this year's Everyone Deserves hamper campaign that would deliver festive food to 1,500 homes across 5 constituencies in...
Keir Starmer, el primer ministro británico, eludiendo responsabilidades, así adelantando que seguirá adelante con su plan presupuestario. Seguimos ahora hasta Bruselas, donde comparece el secretario de Estado estadounidense Antony Blinken.
When I began as Secretary of State, NATO had a strategic concept that considered Russia a partner, didn't mention China, didn't fully appreciate or grapple with urgent threats like cyber and climate. Here in 2021, I set out President Biden's vision to revitalize and modernize this alliance. And in the 4 years since, the alliance has undertaken the most significant reforms and the most significant strengthening that we've seen in decades. Here we are, almost 4 years later. NATO is bigger, it's stronger, it's better resourced to meet the challenges ahead. None of this was inevitable. It came about because of President Biden's leadership, our sustained diplomatic engagement, and building a sense of shared unity and shared purpose. We have a new NATO strategic concept. It recognizes Russia as the most direct threat to the alliance, while highlighting the new security environment that we're operating in with threats from the People's Republic of China, transnational challenges from emerging and disruptive technologies, climate change, terrorism. In 2020, 9 of our allies were meeting the pledge that they made at the Wales Summit in 2014 to spend 2% of GDP on defense, just 9. Today, it's 23, and the remainder of the allies are on track to meet that Wales commitment. We've added 2 new allies in Finland and Sweden, immensely strengthening our alliance for the future. And the alliance itself has strengthened our defense and deterrence capacity. We've doubled our presence on the eastern flank. We've updated our command structure. We have new defense plans that we're implementing. We bolstered capabilities across all domains, including cyberspace and outer space. These enduring commitments, these enduring investments will help provide security for our citizens for many, many years to come. Now, there may be no better illustration of Allied unity and Allied determination than the unwavering support that we've shown for Ukraine since the Russian aggression. Putin, time and again, has sought to break our resolve, as well as the resolve of the Ukrainian people. It hasn't happened. It won't happen. In recent weeks, Russia's engaged in dangerous escalations, including bringing more than 10,000 North Korean troops into the fight, lowering the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons in its doctrine, launching intermediate-range ballistic missiles with potential nuclear capabilities, ratcheting up threats against Ukraine and its partners, continuing to attack relentlessly the energy grid, using winter as a weapon, trying to turn the lights out and freeze people out of their homes. Yet today, over 1,000 days since the full-scale invasion, Ukraine continues to stand strong, and NATO stands strong with Ukraine. We provided, through NATO, critical non-lethal support. We created the NATO-Ukraine Council, which met just again here in Brussels. We've launched a new command, the NATO Security Assistance and Training for Ukraine Command, to coordinate future efforts and to help speed Ukraine's path to membership. The United States has been surging our own resources and security assistance to continue to help build up Ukraine's air defenses, its artillery, its armored vehicles. We are determined, and it's fully my intent and the President's intent, to spend every cent that we have available from the $61 billion that were authorized by Congress in the supplemental appropriation. With the G7, we're finalizing moving out the door $50 billion secured by frozen Russian assets. At the same time, NATO allies and partners of NATO are sharing the burden and shouldering even more of the responsibility. Germany, for example, just made a pledge of $680 million in new military aid. Bulgaria, Czechia, Sweden, others providing personnel to this new NATO command. All told, the United States has provided $102 billion in assistance to Ukraine. Our allies and partners, $158 billion. And as I said many times before, this may be the best example of burden sharing that I've seen in the 32 years that I've been doing this. And of course, when it comes to our own investment, most of it has been invested in our own defense industrial base to produce weapons that Ukraine needs. But those investments are strengthening our defense industrial base, and they're providing good jobs in the United States. We welcomed the Ukrainian foreign minister here to NATO, along with the EU's new high representative, Kaja Kallas. And in doing that, we reaffirmed the commitment to Ukraine's defense and to its irreversible path to NATO and EU membership. We continue coordinating to ensure that Ukraine has the money, the munitions, and the mobilized forces to fight as necessary through next year, or to be able to negotiate, but from a position of strength. Ukraine also shows that European security and Indo-Pacific security are intertwined. Over the past 4 years, we've had an unprecedented convergence among allies on the challenges that China poses to transatlantic security, and that includes its critical support for Russia's defense industrial base, which enables Russia's ongoing aggression and intensifies what is the biggest threat to European security since the end of the Cold War. But this growing convergence here in Europe on the challenges posed both by Russia and in different ways by China, and then growing collaboration between allies and partners in the transatlantic area and the Indo-Pacific, that is a hallmark of the last 4 years. As these threats evolve, as they transcend regions, we've significantly increased engagement beyond NATO, from the Indo-Pacific to the Arctic to NATO's southern flank, reinforcing a 360-degree approach. King Abdullah was just here with us yesterday, and we were very glad to have him at the ministerial. We look forward to opening the NATO liaison office in Amman next year. It'll be the first in the region to further strengthen the relationship between NATO and the Middle East. But what I want to emphasize is this: all of these efforts are not taking NATO out of area. Out of area has been coming to NATO. And that's why it's so imperative that we work together to strengthen our capabilities, to strengthen our capacity, to strengthen our focus on these different challenges, because they're having an effect within the transatlantic community. This evolution is critical so that NATO can continue to adapt to the world as it is already and as we see it evolving. We're at a critical moment for Ukraine and for the defense of the transatlantic values on which this alliance was founded. Over the last 4 years, as I said, historic strides towards strengthening the alliance, which has made America and the world safer. I think this is a time for every ally to lean in, not lean back. Every dollar that the United States puts into our shared security, whether it's deepening cyber defenses, whether it's strengthening our defense industrial base, it's an investment that redounds to the benefit of people across the alliance now and for years to come. A stronger NATO means more capabilities to deter aggression, more effective allies to meet more complex challenges, and the peace and stability that allows our people to pursue fuller lives. And maybe that's the final and most important point, and I want to emphasize this. In the United States, throughout Europe, around the world, people want peace. They don't want war. They want to avoid conflict. And what's so important to understand about this alliance is where it came from and what its purpose is. NATO came together after 2 world wars as part of a series of institutions that were built to try to ensure that we never had another global conflagration. And what's so unique about NATO is the compact that each of its members make, that an attack on one is an attack on all. What's so powerful about that is it tells any would-be aggressor, if you go after one of us, you're going to have to deal with all of us. That is the most powerful deterrent to war breaking out in the first place. That is the most powerful deterrent against aggression. It's not a surprise that Russia has not attacked directly a NATO member. So when we all talk about this powerful desire to avoid conflicts, to prevent wars, to have peace, the best way to do that is through our ongoing investment in the world's most successful defensive alliance, and that is NATO. Thank you.
The first question goes to Michael Birnbaum with the Washington Post.
Thanks very much. Michael Birnbaum, Washington Post. Secretary Blinken, President Zelensky in the last few days has signaled some openness to abandoning Ukraine's effort to regain all of its territory by force in exchange for NATO membership. I wanted to ask what you thought about that strategy, if you thought that was a good idea, and particularly if you thought it was realistic, given that President Trump is about to come into office. And second, a question on South Korea and President Yoon. I and maybe some of us in the press corps were with you in March at the Summit for Democracy in Seoul. Was it a mistake in retrospect to host a democracy summit in South Korea? And are you concerned that Kim Jong-un is going to use this moment of instability in South Korea and transition in the White House to stage a provocation? Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Michael. So with regard to Ukraine, the most important foundational proposition is this: Ukraine and Ukrainians will decide their future. Any decisions that are made about how Ukraine engages the Russian aggression, where it wants to go, what it wants to do, these are decisions for Ukraine and its democratically elected leadership to make. And so from day one, we've repeated and we adhere to the mantra of nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. Well, Ukraine has to make these decisions. I think what we're working to do in the time that we have left is to give Ukraine, to give our own country, to give all the allies and partners that support Ukraine the strongest possible hand to use next year and beyond. If Ukraine determines that it needs to continue the fight, we want to make sure it has what it needs to continue that fight: the money, the munitions, the mobilized forces. If it chooses to engage in a negotiation, and that assumes, of course, that Putin and Russia have any intent of doing that, then again, we want to make sure it's from a position of strength. And from my perspective, I think what I'm trying to do, not just with Ukraine, but across the board, is to give the incoming administration the strongest hand to play in all of these areas, and to pass the baton in a way that they can hit the ground running, because the world doesn't stop just because we have a political transition underway in the United States. So that's what we're focused on. That's what I'm focused on in the remaining time. When it comes to South Korea, let me just say this. We're obviously watching the developments very closely. This is one of our closest partners and allies around the world. We welcome President Yoon's statement withdrawing the martial law order, and there was a unanimous vote in the National Assembly to reject the decision, and he followed up on that. In our judgment, any political disagreements need to be resolved peacefully and in accordance with the rule of law. Korea has been an extraordinary story, an extraordinary success story over the last 3 or 4 decades. And the story that it tells of building the strong democracy, and one, again, where we see the institutions functioning as they should, is one that we thought was important to amplify and to show. And of course, with Korea wanting to take on the Summit for Democracy, we were delighted at that, and we had a very successful summit. But again, I think Korea is one of the most powerful stories in the world about the emergence of democracy and democratic resilience. And we'll continue to look to Korea to set that example.
For the next question, Ciaran Sunderland with DPA.
Thanks. Good afternoon, Secretary of State. Ciaran Sunderland for the German press agency. My question is about Syria. Does the United States believe that Russian President Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine has distracted him or weakened his support for Syrian President Assad in view of the renewed fighting?
Thank you. Look, I think what we've just seen in Syria with the offensive by HTS reflects the fact that Assad's key backers, key allies, whether it's Russia, whether it's Hezbollah, whether it's Iran, have all, in different ways, been distracted, notably by problems of their own making. And it looks like HTS took advantage of that fact. Right now, I think what's so critical is that we see de-escalation. We ensure that civilians are protected throughout Syria, and maybe most critically, that there's actually a political process that moves forward on the basis of the UN Security Council resolution to try to resolve and end the civil war in Syria. If anything, the fact that Assad has refused to engage in any meaningful way on a political process is also what opened the door to this attack and to the gains that HTS has made on the ground. We have enduring interests, enduring security interests in Syria, particularly the interest in making sure that ISIS doesn't resurrect and doesn't come back. There was a tremendous success by the Obama administration and then completed by the first Trump administration to end the so-called geographic caliphate that had been established, all of the ground and the almost physical state that had been established. It's profoundly interesting to make sure that doesn't happen again. And so our own engagement and presence remains important. Partners who are working to make sure that, again, we don't see a resurrection of an extremist caliphate, a jihadist caliphate. That remains vital. We also have in Syria many foreign terrorist fighters, as well as their families who are in camps. We've been working very hard to see them repatriated to their countries of origin, but there are many thousands who remain, and we certainly don't want to see the foreign terrorist fighters reemerge. So we have an enduring interest here. We're looking at what we can do to continue to shore up that interest, but in the first instance, de-escalation, protect civilians, and then if Assad has any sense for his own, for the future of the country, actually engaging in a political process to end this.
El secretario de Estado estadounidense, Antony Blinken, haciendo balance de esos 4 años al frente de la OTAN, de la parte que le corresponde a Washington en el mandato de Joe Biden. Y ahora miramos hacia Moscú con el presidente ruso Vladimir Putin.
And definitely discuss key trends on the global markets and in the Russian economy. And how things stand in the Russian economy will be the starting point of my speech. You know that back in 2022, our businessmen, companies, entire sectors faced formidable challenges because of actions of, to put it mildly, some of the countries of their leading elites and their leaderships. And those countries proved to be unreliable partners. And actually, many of the production and supply chains suffered a blow or were destroyed altogether. Those were the cooperation ties that had been established for decades prior to that. And we hear quite often in the political and military and economic sphere that those countries wanted to inflict a strategic defeat to Russia, including on the economic and technology fronts, to dramatically weaken our industry, finance and services, creating insurmountable shortage of goods at our market, destabilizing the labor market and bringing down the living standards of our people. Obviously, those malign designs failed. After a difficult period, Russian economy not only fully recovered, but now it's going through qualitative structural change, which is important. And probably this is the most important thing and outcome of our work in the economy over the past 2 to 3 years. We've been unlocking technology, industrial and logistical potential, and we have been strengthening ties with prospective partners. Last year, Russia's GDP was up by 3.6%. This is common knowledge, and over January to October this year, it increased by 4.1%, and the bulk of the growth was in the processing sectors with high added value. Over the 10 months, our processing industry gained more than 8%, well, specifically 8.1%. Besides, advanced pace of growth is witnessed in automobile production and machine engineering, high-tech sectors with high added value and high-skilled jobs are seeing an inflow of manpower. In September, the number of employed workers in the IT sector increased by 8.1% versus last year. And in processing industry, there was a 3.9% growth. Structural changes on the labor market are evidenced by the lowering unemployment in our regions where it traditionally was high before. Also, there is a growth of employment among youths below 25 years of age. We know this is an issue in many countries of the world. We also have this, or rather we had it before. And now the level of unemployment among such youths is below 9%, although at certain periods of times it was at 20 or even more percent, 25% in some of the regions of our country. By and large, Russia has a record low unemployment of 2.3% only, compared to the majority of leading economies and emerging economies. This is the minimum. To give an example, in many European nations, it's 7% and above, and in this country, the number is just slightly over 2%. In Italy, it's 7.6%. In France, it's 7.3%. In Canada, slightly lower, 5.4%. In Greece, it's 11%. In Brazil, it stands at 8%. In Sweden, 7.6%. The growth of our economy positively impacts the budget system. Over January to October, the surplus of consolidated budget of our country and the extra budgetary funds was at 2.5 trillion rubles. And I'd like to emphasize, I know here many people are knowledgeable of what I'm talking about. The expenditure amounted for less than 35% of GDP, which matches the levels of 2021, which is a testimony of the fact that the government and the central bank pursue well-balanced policies. Well, there's an objective rise on some of the budget items. Still, we do not overbloat the public expenditure. We want to raise their efficiency, and we pursue well-conceived approach in the budget sphere. Our goal to maintain this sustained long-term economic growth, guaranteeing high-quality, intensive growth rates in the real sector with the help of modernization and of production facilities and improving the labor productivity. At the same time, it is important to avoid tilts in key macroeconomic parameters and disequilibrium in some of the sectors. Definitely, we also need to contain inflation. And now, you know, it is at quite high a level compared with other countries. It's 8.8% in annualized terms. In order to attain positive results, we need concerted joint action by the government and the Bank of Russia. I emphasize this is not a call, a wish. This is a direct guide to action, and the colleagues from the central bank and the government know that quite well, and they coordinate between themselves. We need definitely to have well thought over manner of dealing with all the toolkit to fight inflation without any structural excesses, including the risks of greater gaps in incomes of people and income base reduction among our regions. I already said that an overarching response to the challenge of inflation would be in raising the supply of goods and services at the market so that it should meet the domestic demand of our people and our businesses that want to modernize and expand their capabilities to invest in construction and equipment, procurement and development projects. In this regard, I would ask the government to be more specific about the priorities and support measures doled out to different sectors from the federal budget. Also, we should continue the fine-tuning of the regulatory framework in order to lift excessive administrative barriers in order to step up the output of products and enhancement of the technology sovereignty, as well as establishing new manufacturing sites. Yes, we should take into account that the overall context is restraining inflation, and we are pursuing tight fiscal budget policies, and definitely we should see lending policies be attuned respectively. But starting from August, the retail lending portfolio stopped growing, although in the corporate sector, corporate loans portfolio keeps growing, and I needn't say here in this room that this is probably an outcome that we want to attain in order to rein in the inflation. So the corporate lending is still on the rise, which means that the investment plans of companies are being implemented, while in retail lending we are seeing a deceleration, a slowdown. Well, the economic and financial authorities wanted that to happen. I would ask the colleagues to monitor the dynamics, preventing sharp fluctuations and reduction in loan portfolios. Also, such a structure should be in place in terms of duration and sector breakdown and industries breakdown of loan issues, so that we can attain the strategic development goals and guarantee their achievement. It is important to pay heed to the debt burden of companies with state participation of late. We have been talking about that with colleagues. Of late, it has gone up considerably, this burden. Definitely, we should take into account the large-scale investment programs of the state corporations, and the social support measures are thereof. I will not delve into detail. The Russian colleagues know what I'm talking about. I have already instructed the government, together with the Bank of Russia, to make decisions to manage the loan portfolios of companies with the state participation, to preclude excessive debt burden and imbalances at the corporate lending segment in prejudice of other sectors or businesses. I'll remind you that for many SMEs that have begun to play a more pronounced role, well, the availability of funds, of lending, of borrowed funds is a key factor of the investment activity. And we have a goal by 2030, investments should go up by 60% in real terms versus 2020. Well, given all these difficulties, despite them, fixed investments on the part of Russian business has been growing for the third consecutive year, despite all the problems imposed from the outside. Let me cite some of the numbers. In 2022, the increase of investments was at 6.7%. In 2023, it was 9.8%. Over 9 months of the current year, the growth rate is similar, an increase of 8.6%. In order to support the determination of our businesses to invest in development, expand their capabilities and create jobs, we will continue to strengthen the capital market. We will support companies listing at stock markets with their securities. By the end of the decade, the capitalization of the stock market in Russia is to more or less double, to equal 2/3 of the GDP. Let me note that this year only 19 IPOs and SPOs happened. Issuers have been able to raise 102 billion rubles. This is a very good result, an outcome, but country-wise, it's negligible. I reiterate, the Russian capital market should be more active in developing the development projects and funding development projects and structural changes of our economy.
The government, together with the central bank, have to prepare a package of additional stimulating measures for the issues of shares, and if they get listed, it would be more interesting for them. We need to increase the demand for securities, ensuring effective protection of the rights of investors and the necessary information transparency of companies. I'll remind you that we have already given all the necessary instructions, and we need to step up and intensify work on these directions. Distinguished colleagues, what else would I like to pay attention to? Today, mostly small companies are getting listed, while big organizations, leaders in their industries, are not presented at the stock market. It means that the measures of support of issuers must take into account the demands of small business, promising startups, as well as stimulate big organizations to list their shares on the stock market. For instance, we could align subsidies from the state or preferential loans to the entrance to the stock market. And I think that it is justified. And of course, we invite investors from friendly countries to our stock market. As I said many times, Russia is a part of global economy, and we welcome mutual capital flows. At the same time, we focus on internal sources of financing, so that our citizens, retail investors, had an opportunity to invest their money and to profit inside the country. Such contributions, their returns, would be even more attractive than opening bank deposits. Today, according to experts' evaluations, more than 32 million citizens of Russia show interest to buying securities, and the total volume of their assets exceeds 9 trillion rubles. In the last several years, we've made important decisions to ensure the inflow to the market of the so-called long-term money, to expand the number of the corresponding instruments. This year, we launched a program of supporting voluntary long-term savings of citizens, and the contributions to them are insured and co-financed by the state. A tax refund can be received for the money people put there. Up to 22nd of November, more than 2,100,000 people participated in the long-term savings program. We have attracted 145 billion rubles, and we have a more ambitious goal, actually. In 2026, the amount of the funds attracted in the context of this program must exceed 1% of GDP, or 2,300 billion rubles, and in the future it must constantly grow. I'll add that to accumulate funds of citizens this year, we have launched the so-called individual investment accounts of the third type. With their help, people can make long-term investments to implement operations on the stock market and receive tax benefits. I suggest adding more functions to this instrument so that investors could choose an account for crediting dividends on shares recorded on individual investment accounts, so they can use the received income as they wish at any time, which is very important. Such an instrument of regulation will increase the interest of potential investors to working together with the state. I'll point out as well that since the 1st of January 2025, we will launch shared life insurance for citizens. In fact, it combines the principle of classic insurance and investment. When citizen simultaneously invests funds into assets and shares and receives income, and at the same time ensures his or her life and health. As we agreed, we need to guarantee a repayment of these funds. We need to envisage state insurance for an amount of 2,008,100 rubles. We also need to suggest measures of tax incentives for, first of all, the tax credit for the contributed amounts. And I ask the government to prepare and to adopt such federal laws. There is a suggestion to create a financial mechanism that will be a family instrument of savings, and all the working members of the family will be able to receive tax refund. Respectively, the amount of money subject to such refund must grow at least up to 1 million rubles a year. And I ask the government, together with the Bank of Russia, to determine the parameters of this mechanism of support of families and to implement this decision. Distinguished colleagues, Russian banking system, stock market are developing dynamically on the basis of modern technologies. Around 3/4 of our adult citizens use mobile phones, internet to transfer money from bank accounts and for other financial services. More than 80% of payments for goods and services in our economy are implemented in a cashless form. At the same time, Bank of Russia gradually introduces digital ruble. We have launched a pilot project and worked on replenishing accounts and transferring digital rubles between individuals and companies. And the project already covers more than 9,000 citizens and 1,200 companies, and their number continues to grow. As we agreed, from the next year, the settlements with the help of digital ruble must be used in the system of federal budget, and from the 1st of July 2025, we'll have this opportunity all over the country. I'll also say I'll dwell on the use of ruble on international settlements. We are continuing creating an infrastructure that would make such operations more convenient for business and will reduce costs. We are going to introduce experimental legal regime so that banks could fine-tune the ways for remote identification of clients without creating risks for anti-money laundering legislation, of course. Moreover, we will use flexible approach for tax registration or for non-residents. This is what already done by our banks when they open accounts for such companies. And I ask the government to speed up the preparation of corresponding documents and the State Duma to ensure their adoption in the nearest months. I'll point out that the level of digitalization of financial services in Russia exceeds the level all over the world, and it confirms the high level, technological level of this sphere of national economy. So it's being forward-looking and its ability to set big goals, and it means that it's being proactive. According to experts, one of the main long-term factors of global growth will be the introduction of national digital infrastructure in financial sector. In other jurisdictions like the EU, Australia and Singapore, they are exploring just separate elements of this infrastructure. And if we're speaking about Russia, we have already established it and all the elements are working successfully. It's not just a big achievement of our developers and experts. It is also a competitive advantage of national economy and powerful leverage for its development in the modern world. The leadership of Russia in financial technologies allow us to flexibly establish relations with foreign partners and to promote integration projects to benefit from aligning economic potentials of our countries. I'm also speaking about the work on the investment platform that we are implementing with our colleagues in BRICS. We're starting to implement this work. And all our colleagues have agreed that it is very interesting and useful work for everyone that has good prospects. It will be an instrument to support our economies to ensure financial resources for the countries of the Global South and East. The advanced development of information technologies that is being demonstrated by Russia, our cutting-edge solutions in financial sphere, will be a major contribution to the development of this platform, the key of its success. And I'm sure that we'll achieve it. It is necessary to develop international business cooperation, to build up mutual capital investments, and to establish new supply chains. In this regard, I would like to speak about investment climate in Russia. As you know, the World Bank is no longer present in our country, and it means that it cannot evaluate national business environment. But other objective structures can do that. We have the necessary intellectual potential for that. This year, the Agency for Strategic Initiatives evaluated the business climate in Russia and compared the received results with other countries. The agency used the same approach as the World Bank in its new rating. They took into account more than 800 criteria, from opening enterprises to solving problems of insolvency. And the investigation showed that Russia is one of the global leaders of investment climate rating. At the same time, if we're speaking about legal framework and the quality of public services, Russia has outperformed all the countries. If we're speaking about registration of enterprises and property management, we are on the second place. Yes, we need to apply additional efforts in some spheres. We understand it and we see it. The federal government, regions and the business community will apply these efforts. And the government is always working together with the community. I'm speaking about the development of labor relations, facilitating international trade, the rules of international trade, connecting to engineering infrastructure. And we have done a lot, but there is work to do. We need to pay attention to certain spheres. And I'm sure that the colleagues will organize systemic work with business, and they will move forward significantly in the nearest future. Distinguished friends, Russia unites efforts of the state, society, and business in strengthening economic sovereignty, in ensuring technological leadership of our country, in developing sustainable, nationally oriented banking system and strong stock market. Of course, we invite foreign partners from all the countries that are interested in such cooperation. Without any doubt, such aspirations will be supported at all the levels of public governance of the Russian Federation. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you all the best.
For taking again part in this forum. This is the 15th intervention at our 15th forum. But Since this is almost an anniversary for us, it's the 15th forum, and the audience has changed over the years, I would like to take a couple of minutes to share with the audience the history of this forum and the history of your participation. It happened way back in 2009, in the midst of the global financial crisis, which was initiated in the United States. As we know, all the dark things come from there. And I talked with Joseph Ackerman, one of the most distinguished investment bankers of Europe, the head of Deutsche Bank, who said, look, Andrei, do tell Mr. Putin that a great country cannot exist without a strong investment bank. So I came back to Moscow and I told Mr. Putin, look, we have this great country. We don't have a great investment bank. And Mr. Putin was very quick to respond, and he asked, how can we help? Now, just for you to understand, at the investment market back then, we had foreign banks playing key roles. Deutsche Bank, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley. There were virtually no Russian investment banks. There were some boutique banks, and mostly arranged by foreigners, foreign citizens. I'm referring to Renaissance and others. And they all held various fora for investors. And I said, look, can we invite you to speak at our forum so that you don't speak anywhere else? So Mr. Putin came to us in 2009, 2010, 2011. Then he was elected as president, and we were very concerned that he would not come as president, but he did. And, you know, he contributed a lot to this forum. This is perhaps the most important investment forum that stores interest and attention not only on the part of investors and financiers in this country, but globally too. And here we have more than 400 representatives from different countries. Some 35 countries are represented. Of course, the audience mix has changed dramatically, but I'm confident that Western investors also monitor very closely what we do, and they listen very carefully what Mr. Putin has to say. So we thanked Mr. Ackerman, and in fact, we hijacked his entire staff, more than 100 people. He was pretty concerned at first, but then he took a more moderate approach, and he said that, look, I'm happy that I have contributed to the development of the investment banking in Russia. Indeed, since then, this forum has occupied the leading positions in Russia, and our bank has also solidified its position in the Russian markets. Once again, this forum is 15 years old, and the presentation by Vladimir Putin has always been the keynote speech. And what we treasure most of all is the open dialogue that the president holds with the audience. And the participants normally say, no, look, it's impossible in our countries when the leader of our country would spend an hour entertaining questions from the audience. So that's what we're going to do now, a Q&A session. And Vladimir Putin is ready to take your questions, but we are only limited in terms of time. So please be brief, be succinct, introduce yourselves, state your country, your sector, and I hope that Mr. Putin will be able to and happy to entertain any of your questions. Sector 7, please. Go ahead. You're number 7? Are we asking something? No, that's okay. Okay, number 4, number 7, the bold one. Number 4.
Pendientes de las palabras del presidente ruso en este foro VTV, hablando sobre la cuestión económica, hablando sobre la economía de Rusia, decía que hay que evitar una excesiva deuda. También en este caso estaba hablando sobre la derrota estratégica contra Rusia. Dice precisamente el propio Vladimir Putin que los esfuerzos de Occidente